Today, I'll try to simplify my daily trading strategy as much as possible for every trader out there. We'll talk about everything: when to enter, when to exit, how to find buyers. I'll also talk about 3 major order management techniques that I use it frequently. We have so much to cover. If you're ready, let's start. Since many people get confused about trading strategies, I'll try to simplify what I do and what I look for before trading. This looks like a ROTE, our classic reverse optimal trade entry setup, right? However, this is the basis of one of my trading methods. This is the shape I always look for. There are 2 important legs of this trading setup. First, confirming the liquidity clearance. This could be a trend line, equals, or any kind of institutional level. You can juice up these setups with imbalances and increase the confluences. But more importantly, we need a bias to reach for. We need all those open liquidity points, equals, trends, or institutional levels on the other hand as well. Again, you can use the supportive imbalances to improve your target quality. Before I enter trades, I generally want to see failing imbalances. Failing imbalances are core signs of weakness on the ongoing trend. And what I want to see is the other side of imbalances holding the price. Actually, this is why I love BPR so much, balanced price ranges, because BPR confirms failed and working imbalances at the same time. Lastly, I truly enjoy seeing very strong moves around this area, big momentum, big candlesticks. This is generally a great sign of the price got enough fuel and ready to move up. I hope you get the essential idea of this trading style, which is extremely powerful. I generally have 3 different methods to trade, which I already mentioned in the previous videos. But now I want to clarify this. This is my first style of entry, building generally 2-hour or 3-hour setups by using a 30-minute or 1-hour or 2-hour time frame. Extremely simple to do. These are easy and lazy man setups for extremely busy people. I actually use this a lot if I am going out that day. One important thing, I generally have extremely large stop losses if I use this style, which covers all imbalances and possible pullbacks. If you have a full-time job, this trade style will suit you well. How about the second type of entries? Getting more confirmation with lower time frames and confirming the structure breaks, so we can have more assurance on these trades. This is where the order booking comes in. You basically place all your orders into those imbalances, building mostly 3-hour or 4-hour setups. But these numbers are not fixed. There could be any kind of risk-reward ratio. You generally need under 30 minutes to find the best POE areas, a little more time-consuming. The last type is mostly setting alarms in your POE areas and watching the reactions. This is the most time-consuming trading style. But the advantage is sniper-style trading, which can get over 5-hour setups. Basically, once your alarm hits, you will go to even lower time frames to confirm the entries. You can confirm the reactions, or you can even confirm more micro MSB here. These are the best styles of trading. This style is mostly for full-time traders. Busy or hardworking people can still do it with alarms, but the process is time-consuming. Let's talk about a couple of my trades as recaps. This is the weekly chart of EGLD. Right at the top, you can see that weekly equal highs and weekly imbalance. Now, why do I look for weekly and daily charts a lot? Because they help me to build bias and trade direction. You can see in the weekly time frame trend changes here upwards with extremely strong momentum candlesticks. So we have been in an upwards momentum for weeks. Let's zoom into this area and check the daily chart. As you can see, the daily imbalance here holding the price very well. What is my bias here now? I am long bullish biased. Let's drop to the 1 hour chart. First of all, notice this important swing level here. This is not an ordinary level. It is the weekly previous low level. Price sweeps it very quickly and moves upward. At this point, I have only one idea. How can I build long positions and where can I carry the price? This close level parabolic liquidity seems great. And the structure changes here with this BPR area. Remember what BPR is. One imbalance fails and the other one works. Basically, BPR tells me one side of the trend is weakening, but the other side of the trend is getting stronger. Here is a side note. Our far away target is weekly imbalance and equal highs, but I do not have to carry the price there. All I need is building long positions, that's it. Let's start with the easy setups, lazy man setups. Building 2-hour or 3-hour setups with 30-minute or hourly charts, very simple trades. I have my target and overall entry. A side note is this, when you enter such a trade, make sure your stop loss covers all the imbalances below, because we have no certainty of which one will work. How about booking your orders and increase your reward? Now, in this case, right after this market structure break, this BPR area below is your best place to book your setup. This entry style will improve your reward a lot. How about sniper entries? Let's go down to the lower time frames. First of all, imagine that you set your alarm right above this BPR area here. When the alarm fires, you open the lower time frames. As you can see here, once the price taps the BPR, the inner structure changes and leaves us with micro imbalance to enter trade. Now this is the only way to build 5-hour plus setups with maximum rewards. But believe me, these are not easy. You need to watch the price a lot to make the best entry possible. Let's talk about this theta trade. Again, let's start with the weekly chart. You can notice the significant liquidity area here still open, and the parabolic liquidity just below it, and the mega imbalance right above them. Now all these give me an idea about current price direction. Price also shifts here. Weekly structure changes with extremely powerful momentum. These are all little clues about price direction. However, the daily chart of theta is not amazing actually. The previous one was better. But as you can see, price also builds its trend line liquidity right here. In my mind, price will go up. Weekly and daily charts tell me this bias. Let's go to the hourly chart and work more on the ideas. When I scan the coins with hourly charts, I'm mostly concerned with institutional levels, such as sweep of monthly, weekly, and daily levels. But before that, let's see what happens here. We have these equal highs up top and more parabolic liquidity above. This chart obviously builds liquidity before going up. Again, notice the swing point, not a usual sweep point. It is the previous week's low point. And up top, we have the previous week high point. Open liquidity that is waiting for us, which is also combined with the imbalance, as you can see. Notice what happens here. Inner structure shifts with powerful candles with this mega imbalance. Now let's talk about how can we trade this. Firstly, the easy and lazy man trade. I can directly jump to this trade after I see that strong momentum and imbalance without a pullback. Build myself a 2-hour or 3-hour setup like this. These setups are extremely easy to build. Make sure your stop loss is big enough to cover all the imbalances. How about booking my orders? What is the best place to enter orders here? Yes, obviously this imbalance. By placing my order to this setup, I can easily improve my reward over 3R. This is a style I like to use it sometimes. How about sniper entries? First of all, imagine that you set your alarm right above this imbalance, somewhere around here. Let's talk and zoom in the area. When the price taps the imbalance, you open lower timeframes. You are waiting for the microstructure shift with an imbalance like this one here, and building yourself a sniper entry with over 5R. Again, all these three styles are choices. None of them are better than each other. It is all about your time sacrifices. How much time can you spend on the charts? That is the question. If you have completed the free trading course and feel like you improved your trading skills, but you need more, an extra, a boost, and you want to move to the next level in your trading life, my masterclass is ready for you. You'll learn liquidity, inefficiencies, and structure mastery deeply. And we will look at forward and reverse trading with momentum super boxes. You will learn how to confirm your entries with magic alignment system. Finally, you'll discover a strategy called YOYO strategy, which will open new doors for you about taking and managing trades. If you are interested, you can find links on my website on the description. Take care, friends, manage your risks, and stay safe.